Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of the LEI'D Back Life podcast, where we're talking about how to love entrepreneurship and improve daily. I've got a wonderful guest today who I'm sure many of you already know, who lives a life so near and dear to my heart that I immediately was certain that Moshe had to be one of our guests today. Our most recent episode was me last week. We actually went 2 weeks in a row with me. This was highlights from the previous year, some of the best books I read, some of the best articles I wrote, some of the best things I came across. Now we are back at the beginning of 2025, back into our normal flow, where we're going to interview the best and the brightest from across the country to help all of us figure out how to have a great life. So for those of you that don't know Moshe Amsel, Moshe is the founder and CEO of Profit with Law, host of the Profit with Law podcast, and the Law Firm Growth Summit, one of the coolest, the best digital conference I have ever been to, period. So let me not even say one of the coolest, the best. He helps law firm owners grow their practices with a focus on creating generational wealth. He's got an MBA and over 20 years of experience in IT. As a business executive, Moshe has closed over 30 million in sales in a single year. He also owns Dream Builder Financial, providing business advisory and tax strategy services. A dedicated husband and father of 7 and grandfather. He's actually coming to us from across the ocean in Israel with his new grandson. Moshe balances running a successful business and prioritizing family life. Literally, I tried to get him to reschedule. He said he didn't have to. It's the perfect time. Everybody else is doing what they're doing. And so he's coming to us here from where he is. We're going to talk through Moshe's story from the standpoint of his current businesses being built to allow him to live a life that lets him go see his grandkids, that lets him help lawyers across the country, that lets him really accomplish so many things, and having it all, or having as close to all as possible. Is that a fair assessment, my friend?
Yeah, so Jordan, thank you so much for having me here. It's and I love the whole idea of it. I think that there's so much out there with Gary Vaynerchuk style of like hustle, 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 grind, grind, grind. You got to do everything and anything in order to succeed. And I think that there's plenty of examples around us of people who are not living that and are highly successful. And I don't think Warren Buffett ever, sacrificed his kid's birthday for his business, and there there's there's so much. I mean, you just look around you and look around at the people who are business owners and are successful. And yeah, there are those that are a hustle hustle mentality, but there are plenty of examples of people who have chosen to do something different. And you and I discussed in the green room before we started that it's all a choice. And the more that as you're even introing me, I'm thinking about like, yeah. And the Law Firm Growth Summit, that alone was a business decision that's based on me wanting to live my life a certain way. I chose, it would be really easy for me to build my business to go to a bunch of law firm conferences. The problem is I've got 4 little kids at home and I want to be a present father. So for me to travel constantly throughout the year wasn't an option. So when I thought about creating a conference, I didn't want to create something that was doing exactly what I didn't want to do for everyone else. So that's why the Law Firm Growth Summit was born. That's why, and not the summit itself, the idea of having a conference isn't something that's new, but creating a virtual event where people don't have to travel to it was entrenched in the decisions that I make day to day in my business.
I love it. So I guess I kind of think we need to start from like that moment of clarity, that shift from traveling to not. And then I'd love to dive into like your actual week to see some of like the specific nuts and bolts of it. So kind of walk us through like what led you to this realization of, this family first mentality.
Okay, so I got married really young. I was 19 when my oldest was born. At 26, I got divorced with 3 children. And that was really the beginning of me starting to like think about like what do I want to be known for? What do I want to, like what's my purpose on earth? And at the time I had a really good career in IT. I was doing really well. I was really good at what I did, making good money. But it didn't light me up. Like I didn't feel like, okay, I want to be like on my deathbed. I want people to say, wow, he resurrected servers in the middle of the night. Like that just didn't excite me about my purpose. So I started to think about how I wanted to serve others. And this was before I even thought about like starting my own business. It was just this concept of, okay, what is the plan? What's my life plan? Um, and that I don't know if you want to go into me to go into the whole story of my grandfather, but I'll give you the cliff notes. Basically, my
Sure.
grandfather came from Nazi Germany at 11 years old with his father. He lost his mother and twin siblings in the war. One of his siblings contracted pneumonia right when they were supposed to leave the country. Got
Oh,
hospitalized. His mother stayed, and since they were twins, she kept the other twin also with her. Ultimately, they all perished in Auschwitz. But my grandfather left with his father. They went to Israel first and ultimately settled in Washington Heights, New York. Um, and he was an orange merchant, so he had some sort of wealth that he had amassed, turned that all into diamonds, had sent that to family in Washington Heights before his arrival. So when he got there, he had the inventory needed to start a business, and he started a diamond merchant business. My grandfather took that business over. He was a self-employed business owner, just like you and I. And at some point, I guess he threw off enough cash from the business to make an investment, and he and four of his cousins got together and bought an apartment building in the west side of Manhattan. That apartment building obviously went up in value a lot over the years. Fast forward to I'm a 21-year old just having my second child who interestingly in her apartment, and she just had her own baby. But I'm having my second child, and I go to my mother and I say, look, I've got a six-figure salary. I have enough money to pay a mortgage, but how the heck do I save money for a house? And she turned to me and she said, well, your grandfather has been selling off the units of this building and turning it into a co-op. And he's been putting that money aside to give each of his 36 grandchildren the down payment of their first home purchase. So I
wow.
received a gift from my grandfather, which allowed me to become a homeowner at 21 years old, which obviously completely changed the trajectory of my financial journey.
Right.
When I was 22, not only was I building wealth through my home, but I was also able to just put money into my retirement account where most people would be saving for a house. Everything was different because of that. And it was a very simple thing. I mean, what did he give me? 20, 30, $40,000, whatever it was. He did it times 36. So it's a lot of money, but it doesn't take a lot to change the trajectory of someone else's life. And when I started to think about like, what do I want to be known for? I said, you know what I really want to do is I want to give other people the opportunity to impact their future generations like my grandfather did me. And that's really where the idea of what I do today was born. But then uh, I didn't start there. I went to school, and I mean, there was a whole career path I had to follow in order to get to where I am. Um, but my ex-wife became an alcoholic. And through that journey of supporting my three daughters with navigating that, there was a lot of appointments I had to take them to. Um, they all went to Alateen meetings and to therapy, and each one wanted a different therapist, and each one wanted a different Alateen meeting. They didn't want to be like they didn't feel comfortable sharing
Right.
with the other. So you can think about this, each of them is going to two of these meetings a week, and there's three of them. That's six different trips to six different places that I needed to do. And it became really burdensome and almost impossible for me to carry as an employed individual working for somebody else. My employer was very gracious, but at the end of the day, like they expected the job to be done, and it was really eating into that. And that's when I really got the itch, and I said, I don't have control of my life, and I need to do something to create more control over it. At the same time, I had met my wife now. We're starting to talk about creating a blended family. And I wanted to set myself up in a situation where I could be fully present and make decisions that were best for me and my children that didn't weren't controlled by somebody else. And that's really how I started this trajectory of starting my own business.
So I love what you have done with this story. Obviously, in the moments of going through this stuff, it was rough, but I think looking back on it and what you've been able to do now, and obviously, being there for your kids as a grandparent now and being there for and helping other law firm owners, like it's amazing to have that impact. I always come back to this. It's like, look, it's all about money, right? Like everything is about money, even when it's not about money. And so every year Clio releases their Clio Trends report. And I think for last year, the average solo attorney was making like $65,000 a year, which is like
Mhm.
the highest it's ever been. But then if you look at the average attorney salary across the country for a non-solo, it's almost like $100,000 more than that. And so it's so wild to me, all these people that are like, I need to open my own business. They're working 100 hours a week. They're making $100,000 less than they could be. They're working more hours than would be required. And they think that like it's super risky to not have their own business. So like, can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, um, there's a false it's a real fallacy that working for somebody else getting a paycheck is more reliable than than your own business. Really, the challenge with business ownership for those that are self-employed, what Clio didn't share in that report that you and I both know anecdotally, but I wonder if we can find a study that looks at it, is how much time are those people who are earning $65,000 a year putting into their business? And I think that we're going to find that they're putting a lot of time into it. So it's like 60 plus hours
Right.
um, into that business. And then, if you start looking at, okay, what is 60 hours a week? I'm going to do math here live. I'm pulling up a calculator. I'm not doing it in my head. So 60 times, 52 weeks, right, is 3,120 hours. Um, let's just call it 3,000 hours. You just said that they're making 60,000 divided by 3,000. They're making $20 an hour.
Yeah.
Now they're like, well, what do you mean I'm making $20 an hour? I charge 250 an hour. I charge 300 an hour. I'm making 300 an hour. But no, you're not getting paid for every minute. As a matter of fact, Clio did a report in 2019 that I refer to all the time. And in that report, they surveyed 2,000 solo law firms. And what they found is that the average solo law firm owner is billing 2.1 hours per day and collecting 1.8 hours per day, because you don't collect everything you bill, right? There's
Right.
discounting, there's people who don't pay. So what's crazy is that the solo model would be a great model if you could find a way to be billing every hour of the day. But the reality is that you don't. So what's happening is that people just they don't understand when they say, okay, I'm going to start my own business. They're not really starting their own business. They're just saying, I'm going to go work for myself and provide services to other people. And there's a drastic difference between the two. Are you a business owner or are you a lawyer for hire? Because if you're a business owner, then business is made through the work of others. You need to hire an attorney, you need to hire a marketing agency, you need to spend money and harness other people's abilities so that you're not the marketing guy and the attorney and the billing clerk and the collection specialist. You have to amass that team to do that. And that's what I do with helping my clients, because that's the only way to unlock true value. Now, granted, there are definitely solos out there that are doing very well for themselves, but it took them 25 years to figure that out.
Well, or they can't take vacation, they can't have an emergency come up, they can't, like there's some situation where like I go back to the it takes a village to raise a kid, right? Like it takes a village to run a business well instead of just creating your own job.
Yeah, I want to point out I'm 5,500 miles from home, but somehow I managed to find a profit with law mug.
There we go. I mean I could go downstairs and find one as well. Um, but anyway, but here's the thing, like, let's put this into context, right? So you and I both work 3 days a week, right? You're Tuesday, Wednesday,
Hmm.
Thursday.
Correct.
All right, and I'm Monday, Wednesday, Thursday. I don't There's something
Okay.
about I guess Wednesdays and Thursdays that make them the ideal days to work. Um, what does this look like? The team that supports you that allows you to not work Mondays and Fridays. Like give me some of that team.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll give you the team, but I want to put this out there. The decision to work 3 days a week is the decision that I made, regardless of what my team was in place, right? Like the decisions that what most people have wrong is that they make decisions from what the circumstances will allow, as opposed to making decisions that are right for them and therefore changing the circumstances around them. So for me, the decision was I'm going to work 3 days a week. Now let me figure out how to change things around in my business so that I can make that happen. As opposed to, oh, I don't have the team to support me in this way. I don't have, because the reality is that I wasn't set up to work 3 days a week. When I decided, and this is a fairly new thing for me that I did this year going into September, because Jamie was home with Connor for a few months after he was born. He just turned 1. We had, what did we do actually? Um,
I don't
I don't
know.
know. I
Having
don't know.
having one child, I don't know what you did. And moving
It's
into a new house
yeah,
and
it's a lot. It's a lot. But bottom line is that we needed a structure. We needed to figure out what we're doing. And I didn't want to send him to daycare 5 days a week. Like that just didn't feel aligned with what I wanted. Like I wanted him to have that exposure to me. And then my 3-year-old, he it's very important for him to be around friends. Like we're sending him to daycare not because we need a babysitter, but because we want him to be exposed to other kids. So I wanted to set it up in a way that I could spend time with the both of them a couple of times a week, and that's where the decision came from. Ultimately, first of all, my team. You can't predict what happens in your team, and like people are gonna be like, "Oh, because you have a rock solid team." I have one person who was impersonating somebody else, and I had to fire them.
whoa.
So like I hired somebody in the Philippines, and then she took 2 jobs, and she sent like somebody else to show up to work at my business. I met her once before in an interview. I didn't put the two together. 6 months later, she came forward and said, I'm not this other person. This other person's been taking the money and she's been skimming off the top and paying me less. And now she actually got in a fight with me, so she stopped paying me. So what do you want to do? I was like, well, I have to run an ethical business, so you're no longer working here. But the bottom line is that I I have stuff like that happening in my business. My daughter is one of my key employees. She just had a baby, not the one I'm at right now, but Mimi, who lives in Rochester, New York. She's one of my key employees. She's been out on maternity leave since the end of September. She's not coming back until almost January. So I'm down 2 people, and we were a team of 7, right? So now we're down to 5 people, but I'm still working 3 days a week. I didn't say, okay, I have 2 people less, so I'm gonna start working on Mondays. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some Mondays or Fridays that I decide, I need to work an extra day. And I'm going to call daycare and add a drop-in day for my son. I'm going to call the lady who watches my other son 3 days a week, or actually it's 2 days a week because one day my wife has him. And I'm going to call her, and I'm going to ask them to drop him in. So that stuff happens. But my point is that yeah, I have a team behind me, but that's always in flux. Like you can't predict what's going to happen in your business, and you have to make adjustments. But the default for everyone else is always, I'm going to pick up the slack. And for me, I'm not willing to accept that. Case in point, we're right now gearing up for our next summit, and I've completely delegated getting sponsorships to my team. At this juncture in the sponsorship recruitment process, I would have been much further along as far as how many sponsors we got. So it's hurting me in the bottom line, right? I know that we could be having more sponsors and we don't. But the answer for me to jump in is not in alignment with what I'm trying to create for myself. It's not in alignment with the life I'm trying to create. So that's off the table. Not once in the last 2 months did I go to my team and say, I'm taking it back. Instead, I went and I said, we would have had better traction if I was involved. So let's figure out what's missing. Why would I have had better results than you? What are you guys not doing? So we're just having those meetings and reviewing what they're doing and making tweaks and changes. And I'm willing to accept a less result because of that. And I think that's really the thing, is like, you have to be willing to grow a little more slowly. You have to be willing to take some steps back before, in order to take steps forward. But what it also did is it made me a better leader. It made me a better business owner because it required me to hire people faster, sooner than other people would have, because of the decisions I made. And like, that's really, I'm a profit first professional. So one of the things I talk about is profit first. And the idea of profit first is that you're moving money before you spend it, right? You put it aside for profit before you spend it. It's all based off of Parkinson's law. Parkinson's law says that when you're given a certain finite resource, your needs to consume that resource are going to expand to the entire resource available. So when we use Parkinson's law for time management, and we understand how it works, it's not that if I give more time, I'm going to expand the time to use it. It's that if I give less time, I'm going to have to come up with more resourceful ways to get things done. Like, the inverse of the law is the way that you need to operate and live. And people, they don't get that. They don't do that. And therefore they're a product of circumstance rather than purpose.
So I'm so glad you brought up Parkinson's law. So I explain this to my now 6.5-year-old as a fart smells worse in a smaller room. Like that is
Right. Hmm.
the outside factor that causes you to have to force it down. But seriously though, what you said though is so true, because if you have no prioritization of your own time, you can always take on more and take on more and take on more and take on more until you can't. As opposed to from the standpoint of like, you and I setting this thing of like 3 days a week requires the training conversations, requires the leadership learning, requires the system building and delegation to a team. Like there's so much more long-term value that you get because you don't have the opportunity to just do this or not opportunity, because you are choosing not to exercise the opportunity to just take this extra project on and take this extra project on and pick up that person's slack and grab this from over here. Like it makes for a better business as well as a better life, I think.
Yeah. And what I tell my clients is like, at some point there is a realistic end, right? Like, at some point you have no more hours in the day. You have to sleep like, even if you're like, okay, I'm going to sleep only 4 hours, right? Okay. So you have 20 hours you're awake. And if you're spending 20 hours working, then you're at the max, right? So at some point there is a line and you're going to have to say no to something. So what's the difference if that line is at 20 hours versus being at 6 hours, right? Like, draw the line. There is an end, so just make the end sooner, right?
Right.
Bring the finish line in closer, and then it's going to just force you to do whatever you would have had to do when you got to 20.
Well, and then you get into like the crazy. I mean, let's go real big on this. So, statistically speaking, and I don't know if it's daylight saving starting or ending. I don't understand which one's which. I never will. But
I think we're
the
in regular right now. I think daylight savings is in the summer.
Okay, so then when we go out of daylight savings and we get the extra hour, they actually have like medical evidence that there are fewer heart attacks and strokes the next day. And in the day where we go back into daylight savings and lose the hour, that number goes up the same amount that it goes down. So sitting here saying like, oh, I'll only work 4 hours a night and that way I can get more stuff done, you're actually putting yourself at a higher risk for heart attack, stroke, diabetes, like so many other things. Like you are taking yourself out of the game sooner by trying to burn the candle at both ends. And so like there's this crazy concept of going slower actually lets you put in more hours just over a longer period of time because you're alive, because you're healthy, because you're focused, because pick whatever level of benefit you get from
Right.
showing up correctly to work. It's crazy to me.
Yeah, actually, there are studies, and I can't name the study here, so I'm just going to speak out of my ass. But I've heard the studies, right? There are have studies have been performed on like, what is the optimum number of work hours in a week before there's a loss of productivity in how productive you are during that time. So it's not that collectively you're not going to be more productive with more hours. It's just that the amount of productivity ratio per minute or whatever it is greatest during this amount of time. And that number is something like 24 hours or something like that in a week. It's in that range. And yet society has us in a 40-hour work week.
Right.
And the reality is that the 40-hour work week is a total myth. And even people working for a paycheck, if you're in any sort of profession or position where you're getting paid anything more than, 100,000 a year, you're probably being asked to work more than that. And if you're working for yourself, you're probably doing more than that. So when we think about it, we're actually hurting ourselves. Like, we'd be better off going and playing golf and just working 4 hours a day, because we'd be super productive during that time. And
Well,
and that's
and
where,
I'd be playing golf with a bunch of chiropractors and other lawyers and referral sources. So I'd also be, I mean, I do this like, so I'm also generating business for my company while I'm doing these fun things to then focus on real work in quotes or whatever we want to call it. Like, it's just
right?
wild to me.
Yeah, 100%. And going back to this idea, like, hey, my daughter had a baby on Friday night. On Sunday, I was on an airplane to Israel. Like, you got to give notice if you're working for somebody. You got to say, hey, I need to take 2 weeks off. When can I do that? Here, I got on a plane, and when I landed, I went into Slack and I sent a message to somebody on my team and said, here's a list of everything on my calendar. Here's the 6 things I'm going to keep. Reschedule everything else to next week. And that's it. Like,
Yeah.
everyone's going to wait. Nothing's going to change. Like, whatever was going to happen this week is going to happen next week instead. And I'm in control of that. I'm not waiting for somebody else's permission. I'm able to just do the things that are the most meaningful to me. And to me, there's nothing, and not everybody feels this way, but for me, my number one is family. Like, to me, being there present for my kids, that's the most important thing. There's nothing more important in the world.
All right, I want to come back and talk about the downside of this because I think we have to address that, or at least the awareness of what you're sacrificing by not sacrificing your family. That being said, though, I want to touch on this week's newsletter is 10 tips for building habits that stick. And I think that aligns so much what we're talking about here because in essence, like we have the things that we habitually do, which allow us to work this time, which allow us to train up staff, which allow us to create these systems. So if you're looking for 10 tips on having those habits actually stick, especially as we get to, New Year's resolutions slowly petering off, great article to check out. Okay, so, but give me the like what are you sacrificing by not sacrificing your family, right? So you talked about like growing slower, pushing those things to next week. Like there's going to be some impact from that.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, First of all, cash flow is affected. There's no question that, like, there are pieces of the business that are affected by the work that I do. And when I'm choosing not to do something, it affects it. Whether it's I'm not having a conversation that's going to close a sponsor into our event, I'm not having a conversation with a fractional CFO client, and that's going to affect the how fast they get to their profit margin target. Whatever it is, there's some effect on the business. And the same way that I'm able to draw a line or prepare for that, I'm also able to, I know that I need to have a certain amount of ammunition in the bank, because there's going to be these things that come up that I'm just going to say I'm doing this. So I have to be financially prepared for that. Another one is my personal well-being, and for me, this is a big challenge. And I think that you have really worked on yourself over the last couple of years to master it. And it's something that I struggle with. I continue to struggle with, and that is prioritizing myself. And I'm talking about my health habits, like going to the gym, doing, exercising, eating properly, taking in the right amount of water. That is a struggle for me, because it feels like I'm choosing between my kids and me, right? Like, that for me, that's my personal struggle. And I know that it's funny because in the same conversation, everything we're talking about is simply a matter of choice. Like,
Sure.
I just need to choose to make that important enough. And I've been working on it. I have a coach for that, just like everyone should have coaches in every area that they want to improve in life. I have a coach on that, and and I'm working on that. I'm working on. I've been for a couple of years making better health, choices as far as eating, and now I'm trying to make better choices as far as the exercise that I do and stuff like that. But if I had to like look at what area of my life do I feel the least proud of, it's my own personal health, the way I take care of myself.
Well, and so one, thank you for the kind words. For those that don't know, like last year, well, I guess 2 years ago when you're listening to this, I did 75 hard twice. So 150 days of two 45-minute workouts, following a diet, no alcohol, no cheat meals, no nothing. So as much as I wanted to lose a little bit more weight this year than I'm going to, this year was my like figure out what 365 livable looks like instead of, alternating 75 hard on. Um, Alternating, that sounded wrong. Alternating 75 hard runs whenever it was. But again, I go back to the same thing we talked about from the golf thing. Like, so for me, I meet with my therapist over the phone while I ruck for an hour and he walks. I do a marketing meeting with my team while I'm walking in the morning. I have the audiobooks lined up I'm going to listen to, and I listen to them while I'm doing that or while I'm working out. So again, like I hate multitasking, but I like the multi impacts. As much as I can sit here and go for a nice leisurely stroll and get the benefit of sun exposure and exercise and 700 something days of 10,000 steps, I also feel like I'm accomplishing the content ingesting that I need to do. I'm also benefiting from some of the meetings that I'm having, and everybody else can walk or not. I don't care, but like there's ways to find these multiple impacts to fit things in, and ultimately get the results you want in the time you want to spend on it.
Yeah, so I mean, to that extent, like for example, I purchased like this desk thing that goes on my Peloton handlebars, so that I could put my laptop on it, and then this way, instead of sitting at the desk working on my laptop, I drop it on the Peloton desk, hop on, and I'm on the bike while I'm being productive or in a meeting or stuff like that. So I'm doing stuff like that. But I mean, for me personally, I know that I need to go to the gym 3 times a week. Like that's just something I need to do, and I'm just figuring out how to navigate that in my life without, because when I have the kids, I can't. They're well, can't is the wrong word, but the gym that has daycare available is astronomically expensive. It's not in my wheelhouse to join. So when I have my kids is not an option. So I need to work around that. The weekends is really difficult because we have a really busy life with 4 little ones and all the sports that they participate in and everything else. So, but I'm sharing this because I don't think it's helpful for people to come onto a show, listen to us talk, and they're like, "Yeah, you're two unicorns, right? Like you guys are able to do it, but you don't have these other challenges." I share the challenges that other people have. My choices have made other things more difficult, but at the same time, that's something I need to navigate. But I spent from 2014 to now, I mean, it's 10 years building my business, and it's gone through multiple iterations. I mean, 2014, I was working at night, starting it. I was still working my job. I didn't go full time into my business till 2017 when I quit my day job. I didn't start working with lawyers until 2008, late 2018, beginning of 2019. So, just all the journey of figuring out what I'm doing, who I'm doing it with, and then navigating how am I creating this situation where it's creating the life that I want, all took time. But from day one, when I started the business, I started it with the intention of this being the thing that allows me to make the decisions I want to make for myself. And ultimately, if I look back, I wasn't willing to sacrifice that. And that's all it took. All it took was just me saying no. This decision is not in alignment with what I am trying to create, and therefore I'm not going to do it. I still don't go to legal conferences. I would benefit greatly from speaking on stage. I would benefit greatly from having a table set up. But at some point, I'll have enough staff that they're going to go to legal conferences for me. At some point, my kids will be old enough that travel won't be such an issue. But right now, I still have a 1 year old at home. I'm just not going, and because once you start doing that, the speaking circuit, I mean, you could be on the road every week for 40 weeks out of the year.
Yeah.
And, that's just not in alignment with where I am in life right now. And I'm not judging anybody who does it. It's just you have to make the decisions that are going to give you the life that is important to you, that is going to make you proud of every single day that you do. And I think that so many people say, oh, I need one more client so that I need to do one more thing so that when you get into that trap of the one more thing that's going to get me there, you're never going to get there because it's a moving target.
Right. Well, unless you actually follow that. Like, unless you actually have okay, at the point that I have, 10 fractional CFO clients or 10 coaching clients, or whatever, then like I will do X. As long as you actually do it, it's fine. But I agree with you. 99%
Right.
of the time, there's always one more. There's always one more case. There's always one more staff member. When I hire another staff member, I'll change this. When there's always that
Right.
tomorrow never actually comes. We only live in the present. And so I think let me give my perspective and then I want to get your perspective on this. So I think the issue though is for so long we really had this we will work Monday through Friday 9 to 5, and then we will allow some of it to creep. And then we also know that we want to spend some time with the family. So we'll put that in from 6 to 8. And then we'll also add this. And then we look at it from the standpoint of growing outward. I think it needs to be a situation where you look at it from what do I actually have to do? What do I actually want to do? What do I need to do to support that? And then see what's left. So, like for me, my child, we leave for school with my child ideally at 8 o'clock in the morning. Normally it's 8:05. But I know that from there, he needs 45 minutes to get ready. So that's 7:15. And then I know that for me to get my steps, I've got to do an hour in the morning. So I'm up at 6 to be out the door at 6:15, to be back at 7:15, to do the thing with him, to get him to school, and then I can get to the office between like 8:30 and 8:45, so I can start at 9 on, the days where that's going to happen, and then I sort of build everything off of that. So then if I want to get up at 6:15, I'm trying to go to bed at 9 to give myself what is recommended, the 9 hours of attempted sleep to get 8 to be where things need. So then you keep working backwards from there. I don't know if you have a different view or the same view or similar or whatnot.
Yeah, I'm probably not as structured as you are. But we have our morning routine, and it's from when the kids wake up until they get out the door. And it's basically TJ's bus comes first, Rachel's bus comes second, and then on the days they're going to daycare, I got Derek and Connor get dropped off. So essentially, what I try to make it look like is I feed everybody breakfast, I get everybody dressed, and we get TJ off to the bus, and then we have about 20 minutes to get Rachel off so we can get her bag packed, get her off to the bus, and then I pack two kids in the car and we go. On some mornings when we're ahead of schedule, the kids get packed in the car before Rachel's bus stop so that we're already in the car at the bus stop instead of needing to come back to the house and do that. And on other days, it doesn't work. So I don't book anything on my calendar until 10 a.m. because Rachel gets picked up at 9. And I know that there are days that I'm not getting the kids into the car and off to daycare until 9:15. The whole drop off routine is minimum 20-25 minutes just from when I leave my house till I come back at two different stops. And the um so I leave 9:15, 25 minutes, back 9:40, 9:45. It and whenever I allow that to be violated, whenever I allow something on my calendar before 10 o'clock, I'm always regretting it. I'm always either showing up late, showing up unprepared, or just making it by the skin of my teeth. And it's adding stress to a time of the morning that shouldn't be stressful. And
Right.
what happens is that I show up differently as a parent when I'm stressed. I'm not as patient with my kids. I'm raising my voice to them because it's their fault that they're not moving fast enough, and because I made an appointment that's going to be an issue, right? So I think that understanding how these little things affect you, it is what allows you to create the boundaries and the structure. So I may not be as regimented with my sleep schedule as you are, but what I do know is I do know that every time I schedule something before 10 a.m., I regret it. And I also know that my first kid gets off the bus at 3:30. He's 9 years old. He doesn't need me to get him off the bus. He doesn't need me to be present when he walks in the door, but at 4 o'clock, Rachel gets off the bus. And somewhere between 3:30 and 4 is my ideal shutdown time. So even on the 3 days that I am working, there is nothing on my calendar after 4 o'clock ever. And even my team just messaged me and said, "Hey, you asked me to reschedule this particular client to this particular day. The only slot you have is at 3:30. Do you still want to take it because it's an hour call?" And in this case, because I'm in Israel, next week I'm going to be coming back, and I have something Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. I have an event, like a virtual event I'm attending. I knew that this is the only time I can meet with him. I said yes, but they know to ask permission. They're not
Right.
going to put that on my calendar because they know that 4 o'clock that's it. Day's over. Um, and I think it's important for your team to see that structure too, because they model what you do. You don't want your team working until 7 o'clock at night, right?
Well,
So my
I hope
team,
you don't. I hope anybody
yeah,
listening to this doesn't want that.
well, yeah, exactly. Well, the idea of creating a team around you is not that they should be hustling instead of you. It's that they should be working a calm and collected job and be able to perform for you in the same productive manner that you want to perform, the same way that you want to work for 20 or 30 hours a week. Your ultimate goal should be to figure out how to get your employees to do the same.
Well, and that's the beauty of all this. So like, we're talking about it from the standpoint of getting our kids out the door to school. If that's not your focus, or if you don't have kids, then swap that to like court starts at 9. So back up from that. And and just like Moshe said, about raising your voice with your kids, which I'm guilty with my son, especially when I'm being rushed. I don't think I would raise my voice with a client when I feel rushed. However, there's 1,000 other similar things that I am going to do instead. I'm going to be flubbing through words. I'm going to look distracted. I'm going to be still trying to check my email. Like the more that we show up better, the more we help our employees show up better, the more they show up better for clients. It's not trickle down economics. It's trickle down happiness, trickle down focus, trickle down, something. Um,
Look,
all
it's top down leadership, right? Like everything that you do affects everything around you, right? It's the people that are reporting to you, the family you care for, and even the friends around you. Like everybody experiences you in whatever way you're showing up in that moment. And if we set the boundaries right, we can show up in the best version of ourselves most of the time. I don't think anybody's ever going to show up the best version of themselves all the time. But imagine a situation where you're showing up in the best form possible for your kids every time you're interacting with them. You're showing up in the best form possible for your spouse and every time you're interacting with them. You're showing up in the best form possible for your team every time you're interacting with them. When you have the right boundaries in place, you create the right structure, you can show up in the best version of yourself in all these domains. And when you violate those boundaries, that's when there's somebody in that spectrum that's going to suffer. And ultimately you're the one who suffers because you feel crappy about it. Like
yeah.
if I yell at my kid an hour later, I'm the one who's like beating myself up, like, why did I do that? He didn't deserve it, she didn't deserve it, right? Like, and we could be very hard on ourselves, but there's a reason for that, and that is because we should be doing better. So do better is, I mean, like, honestly, if I had to like be one takeaway from this whole conversation, like what is the one key for me? It's figure out what those boundaries are and just set them and stick to them. And you're gonna have be a changed person.
Uh, you took the last question out of my mouth. So I'll just flip it. So next week we're gonna have Ryan McKeen on. For those of you that don't know,
Oh, I love Ryan.
yeah, Ryan has such a good story. Ryan basically sat down with EOS, created this vision of having a $10 million verdict, ended up having a $100 million verdict in half the time that he set for himself. Now does coaching for other lawyers. Super excited to have that chat with him next week. As we get towards the end here, though, Moshe, if for people that are
And
smart enough,
he has a new book, The Way. Go on
M,
Amazon and pick it up.
yeah, which I think is like it's like 50 pages, but it's
Yeah, it's
like
really
because he
small.
distilled
Actually,
it down to what you actually need instead of fluffing it out into a bunch of crap, which I think is exactly what we're talking about here too. Like really just focus on what you need and don't fill the time, fill the space, fill the pages.
yeah, I actually have it with me.
There we go. All right, that being said though, I want to get some people who are smart enough to listen to this and want to hear more of you. What's the best way for them to do that?
Well, this conversation is airing in January. The Law Firm Growth Summit is February 4th through 6th. Go to lawfirmgrowthsummit.com and join us for 3 days for an absolutely free virtual experience where you're going to be exposed to 50 amazing speakers and amazing talent in the legal industry. Check out the Profit with Law podcast. And if you like anything that we have to share and you want to figure out how we can help you, there's plenty of emails and social connections that you can find through those two, the event and the podcast, to find me and my team.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you to everybody who watched and listened to this. We'll see you this Friday for the 10 tips for building habits that stick newsletter, and then next week with Ryan McKeen. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you for having me.